I'm Billy, I'm an alcoholic. Hi, my home group's the Tell It Like It Is group in Palm Beach Gardens on the other side of the state. We meet on Friday and Monday mornings at 9 a.m. I would say, if you're a man, come on by, but I will abide by the traditions. We are a men's group, but if a woman shows up who needs a meeting, you let her in. So that's what the literature says. It says you can't be a men's meeting if you don't let any alcoholic in who needs help. Can't be a women's meeting. Well, you can be if you're a women's recovery meeting, but if you want to be a women's AA meeting and somebody shows up dying of alcoholism, just got to let them in. So my home group is 9 a.m. Mondays and Fridays. It's really great to be here. My sobriety date's January the 5th of 1990. If by chance you wandered in here and you were hoping for the candles and essential oils and crystals meeting, that's the wrong meeting for sure. That's another time this weekend. But I'm glad to be here to talk about one of my favorite subjects. If you're new or you love the big book, you know what I'm going to talk about tonight is laid out from the blank page at the beginning of the book, through the prefaces and the forwards, through the doctor's opinion and Bill's story, and there is a solution and how it works, and we agnostics, that's where it gets us to. That's the assignment I've been given to cover, and sometimes people would say that's an easy assignment to cover. It's not as in-depth or deep as, the following steps 4 through 9, and there's so many people who are great at that, but it's unbelievable in the world to me today, and I almost feel sorry for newcomers as to how much confusion there is around what is alcoholism. Because when I said I'm an alcoholic, I just want to make it very clear, and I don't say this to insult anyone if you have different beliefs, but I don't suffer from alcohol use disorder. I am not a heavy drinker. I am not a moderate drinker. I am not a binge drinker at times, but no, I'm an alcoholic, as described in the big book. And I've grown to really, really understand the more I've been sober and the more time I've spent with so-called normal people, like how important it is to really understand what alcoholism is. Because a lot of them don't, which is unfortunate. Especially because a lot of people who need help are getting advice from people who they've never been exposed to what. I was on the phone with somebody at work, and it was tragic. It was a couple of weeks ago, and it's a person who works for me now, who worked for me at my old company, and I don't deal with them too much. And their sister called me. I used to work with them too, and things are getting really bad. But at one point in the call, she said to me, "Yeah, we just need to get her somewhere to get to the root of why she drinks." And I said to her, I said, I know you're not going to want to hear this from me, but it doesn't matter. What matters is to find out if she's an alcoholic. So that's one example. The other example is, my partner at work, another executive that I work with very closely, he lives not too far from where we are right now, and he's a great guy, not an alcoholic. Unfortunately, his son has a lot of tendencies like I did as a teenager. His son recently got sent away somewhere to, learn how to live a better life in the wilderness. And but I bring him up as an example because his life has been difficult. And when he comes home, he can have a glass of wine or two. He can have a beer. Alcohol serves its intended purpose for him. It does what it's supposed to do. It takes the edge off his day. Makes him feel a little better. Maybe helps him sleep at night. I heard someone say recently, and I'm going to steal it because I love it. Because, once you've been in AA for a while, you hear the definition of insanity. Which is doing the same thing, expecting different results. But truthfully, that's not my story. That's not my insanity. My insanity around drinking is I did the same thing knowing what the results were going to be. Like, that's my insanity. There was no surprise as to what was going to happen. Zero. Like, the people might change, the places might change, but there's no surprise that things are not going well tonight. There's no surprise that the later in the day I drink, the better your bad idea sounds to me. Like, the later in the night as it goes and the drunker I get, the worse your idea is, the more I can't wait to do it. Like, I know that I could get hurt tonight. I know I could get arrested tonight. I know my mother might lock the doors and I might have to sleep out in the cold tonight because she's not letting me in the house until the morning. Like, that's the real insanity, that I knew what was going to happen. If you're new, I'm not going to try to read pages to you because I want to let you know that there's only one way to do that. And I know this is going to sound horrible if you're anything like me. But you got to do it one-on-one. You got to find someone you trust. You got to get a sponsor, and you got to go through that book. It doesn't matter how many tapes you play. Doesn't matter I can separate Joe and Charlie sometimes by years or decades, depending on how they sound. Like, it doesn't matter how many Joe and Charlie tapes you listen to. Like, that book is like drinking. If you're like me, I've never been able to get drunk watching other people drink. It's never worked for me. Like, I have to drink. Just watching you drink, I don't get drunk. Which is the same for that big book. But if you are new, I just want to let you know that it took me a long time to figure out, 9 or 10 years, that for me, there are only two kinds of people in the world that matter. There are people who can drink and people who can't drink. That's it. The rest is all window dressing. I don't care what religion you are. I don't care what color you are. I don't care whether you're gay, bi, straight, trans. I could care less. I don't care about any of that. It's, do you know what bucket God put you in? Are you somebody who can't drink or can drink? Now, if you're like me, the problem is I am going to do all I can to prove that I am in the can drink bucket. Like, that is the story of my life. Which in the big book we call more about alcoholism. It's all about proving that I can drink like other people. If you go on a cruise or you go somewhere or you're in the supermarket and you hear somebody throw out a code word. We have lots of code words in AA, right? And sometimes you're in the bank or a supermarket, or maybe you're on a cruise and you see a sign, friend of Bill's. Or if you hear somebody use one of those words out in public, you might just ask them, hey, you a friend of Bill's? And that's nice and it sounds good and it's a kind of easy way to not call anyone out. But truthfully, I don't care if you're a friend of Bill's. I tell my sponsees all the time, I care if you're a friend of Fred or Jim's in the chapter more about alcoholism. Do you have a personal relationship with Fred and Jim? Because those stories are so, so important to find out if you're a real alcoholic. I did all I could to not be in that bucket of can't drink. All I could. And as a drinker, I take advice from the wrong people in the wrong places. If you're new, I'm just going to even be honest. Outside your parking lot of your meeting, the newcomer circle, not a place to get advice. Not a place to get any advice on Alcoholics Anonymous. Zero. Another place, the waiting room in the probation department where other people... That's not a good place to get advice either. I'll tell you another place, DWI school. DWI school is not a good place to get, because I run into a guy when I'm 17 years old who's 30 who tells me things like, Billy, You know it's the shots after, which I knew by the time I was 17. It was the first shot after the 8th beer that destroyed my life. If I could just not do that shot, I would be fine. That is what sets everything off to the races. And, he was like, when you're really trying to keep it under control, drink white wine spritzers. Now, I don't like admitting how old I am, but, I came into AA when I was 14. I got sober when I was 23. I'm 57 today. That's before Bottles and James even existed. That's before there was any commercial on TV for Bottles and James. There was no such thing as a wine cooler yet. I didn't even know what a white wine spritzer was. But you know what I know today? That I'm just like Fred and Jim. I can drink 40 of them. Like I can drink 40 of those things in a night. Like the next morning, I have to take an ice tray out of my mother's freezer and break it over a towel. And I roll the ice up and I go back to bed after having a cigarette. And I fall asleep with the ice melting on my head, because if you've drank in 40 white wine spritzers, you're just never going to drink that stuff again. It's like the worst hangover you've ever had in your life. But that's because I'm like Fred or Jim. Or the guy who told me I don't prepare to drink good enough. I was a teenager. I didn't even know there was such a thing as preparing to drink. No one had ever clued me into this. But this guy told me, Billy, when you come home, like before you go out, you need to put 2 or 3 aspirin or Tylenol on your nightstand. You need to put a tall glass of water on your nightstand, so that when you come home in the middle of the night, you take those aspirin or Tylenol so you won't have a headache in the morning, and you drink that large glass of water so you won't be dehydrated. And because I love Fred and Jim so much, it's because I'm willing to do anything to not drink except not drink. That's basically the story of my life. It's kind of like getting up in the morning. I know a lot of people become morning people in sobriety. I've kind of been waiting for it to happen. I have to get up because of work. But naturally, I've been a 12 and 12 person since I've been a teenager. I would rather be sleeping for 12 and up for 12. That's how I used to live, right? That's a good pattern of life when you're a teenager. And, I will try to do anything to get up on time except go to bed early. Like, I'll set 3 alarms. I'll put an old-fashioned alarm clock on the other side of the room. But I'm not going to, be a quitter and quit on life and go to bed before midnight. I'm not going to do anything that crazy. But that's like drinking for me. Like, I didn't know about this preparing to drink. And the good thing about this preparing to drink is you still get to drink, which is what that chapter is all about. That I'll try anyway. But it's the any old story. I'm looking at someone who grew up not far where I grew up. I can tell you what had happened in my mother's house. I wake up in the morning. I don't know where the Tylenol is. The water is spilt. There's empty White Castle boxes on my nightstand. There's 2 tall boys from 7-Eleven that I needed to get home, apparently, from wherever I was. I needed 2 travelers. But here's the insanity. Tomorrow night, I would rather do that than say I'm not going to drink. I'll go with the putting 3 aspirin out and a large glass of water rather than not drink. Because I know today as I stand here that not only do I have a very abnormal reaction to alcohol and drinking, that I have a very abnormal relationship with alcohol. I have both of them. It's hard for me. When I think of life today, if you're new and this is really, AA can be a tough place to come in, and it's a whole different way of living, and, it's not easy. But I can tell you one of the things that I think about today, as far as drinking, like the way I like to drink I don't have that kind of time in my life today. Like, my life is so busy, I'm almost scared to have a drink again because I don't have that kind of time. Like, my kind of drinking requires time and dedication and, a lot of periods of days off, and my drinking requires a lot of that. But the outside world, they don't really understand that. And we get so lost sometimes in making AA psychology, or, I don't want to disrespect anyone in this room, much like my partner at work. But I'm sure as I stand here today, myself included, that there are many of us in this room that have other problems besides alcoholism. I'm sure there are. Statistics tell me there are. Doesn't matter what that problem is, or problems, people have them. Lots of them. But what's important to realize is that there are a lot of people who have those other problems we have who aren't alcoholic. Like, the same consequences are not on the table. Like, we sometimes fail to talk about the allergy that we have and we suffer from. Like, people say, the big book, the first 164 pages, but truthfully, we say that alcohol is only mentioned in the first step, but that's only if you're in a meeting reading something on a wall. Joe and Charlie would say, if you're working the steps off the wall, off a shade, you have an off-the-wall program. Like, yes, that shade, it only mentions alcohol in the first step. But that big book, yeah. No, from that blank page, through the preface, through the doctor's opinion in the forwards, through Bill's story, through We Agnostics, through more, There Is a Solution, through more about alcoholism, yeah, it's talking about drinking. Drinking with an ing. Which if you look that word up in the dictionary, it seems today to me, it sometimes drives me crazy. I have a sponsor who's a huge, he's an expert big book thumper. Much better than I will ever be. And so he's always having people look up words, right? And I have a 1939 dictionary at my house, so he loves my 1939 dictionary. But I have to tell him sometimes, look up the word drinking. Like, why are you afraid to look up that word? Like, drinking is putting liquid in your mouth and imbibing it. Why are you afraid to look up alcoholism? Which has to do with too much drinking of alcohol. Like, I have a very abnormal relationship with alcohol. There's a lot of other things in life that I have a normal reaction to, but not alcohol. The first step is so important to me because, I fly a lot. There's a lot of other people here who fly a lot, but I always laugh when I'm on a plane. I always laugh when the stewardess right before, the flight attendant right before we're about to take off is like, oh, ladies and gentlemen, just want to let you know, we have somebody with a peanut allergy today. So, just want you to know, we're not serving any peanuts, and if you brought any with you, we would appreciate if you would keep them, in your bag or whatever. And the funny thing about that, or the tragic thing, depending upon who you are, is everybody on that plane understands that there's somebody allergic to peanuts. And they can't eat peanuts. And it doesn't matter how much therapy they go to. And it doesn't matter if they have 11 other problems in their life and they deal with them. The allergy does not go away. It's there. I sometimes would love to have them say, ladies and gentlemen, the man in 4C, he has an allergy to alcohol. We're not serving any alcohol today. And if you brought your own, we'd love to have you just, because people would be like, no way, screw that guy. Right? That's what they would say. That's what people would say. They'd be like, who cares that guy's allergic to alcohol? Because the rest of the world really does not understand our allergy. And I will tell you that a long time ago now, I don't like to date myself, but in the 90s, I was at some big book workshop and I heard some speaker say something and I thought it was kind of funny. Made me laugh a little bit. Thought he probably made it up because he gets a couple of laughs. Sounds good from the podium. No, I don't have his exact story, but I have one just like it. And it's my story in sobriety. You know, for the last 25 years or so, I've worked in the corporate world and I've traveled all over the world and I've gone out to lunch and dinner with so many people. Sometimes, you know, I'm trying to slow it down now, but sometimes I would eat dinner in 3 different states a week with all different people. And, you know, I've worked with a lot of great people. And sometimes if you get close to somebody, if you knew, this is a public service announcement for 30 seconds. There's a big difference between people knowing you don't drink and why you don't drink. And you run that one by your sponsor. Not everybody needs to know. It's none of their business. But there are times when you will tell people. I've become close to people at work. I've shared that I'm an alcoholic. I've been at small dinners, 2, 3 people, where they all know and maybe somebody asks something. Sometimes when somebody asks, you know they probably have somebody else in their life. They just want to get a little information. But my story is true 100% of the time. 100%. That any time I've ever been at a table like that, where somebody says, you know, Billy, you came to AA at 14, you know? Or, how'd you get to AA? When I look at them and say, well, the first time, when I was 14 years old, a juvenile court judge sent me to Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, when I say that, 100% of the time, the people at the table, I want to put my hand over their mouth because I know what they're going to say. They're going to say, wow, 14. You must have had a really rough childhood. They can't help themselves. They have been trained by the outside world, even the outside recovery world, even the outside treatment world. They have been trained to blame their alcoholism on something external. They want to give me a reason to blame my alcoholism on something else. Now, also going to dinner for like 25 years. All places. I didn't grow up in a family that goes out to dinner a lot or anything like that. It took me a long time to learn what fork to use, what's the butter knife, when do you have 2 forks, the whole thing. I've had to go to training, you know. But I've also learned that there are a lot of people in the world with an allergy to shellfish. A lot. I never knew that. Probably because I don't pay attention, but I just never knew. It wasn't important to me to know that there are a lot of people allergic to shellfish. Do you know how many times I've been at a dinner table where either waiter says, oh, does anyone have any allergies here? Or somebody at the table says to the waiter, hey, I just want you to know I have a shellfish allergy. Just let me know if there's any shellfish. Do you know that, again, 100%. 100% of the time, no one has ever asked that person if they had a rough childhood. Ever. Not one single time. None. 0. They just accept. They accept. Everyone at the table accepts. Wow, that person has a medical, scientific allergy to shellfish. And so because of that, there are questions that I get that the lobster shrimp person does not get. No one ever says to the lobster shrimp person, maybe you were going through a shellfish phase, right? No one ever says that. Whereas I came to AA at 14 and got sober at 23, people want to, well-meaning people, want to say, well, maybe you're going through a phase. But there's no phase for an allergy. Or, I've never heard somebody at the same table say, maybe you should just have 1 shrimp. You know? It's been a long time. Maybe you now may have one shrimp, No one says that. But how many well-meaning people have told me or said to me, and I mean well-meaning people, you don't think you could have just one? And when I talk about this disease, I'm talking about not only well-meaning, but well-educated. 2 years ago when I moved, about a half an hour from one house to the other, I changed doctors. So I went to this new doctor. I filled out all the forms. There's always that thing there. How many drinks do you have a week? And it's kind of tragic. The highest number is 11 a week, right? Like 11? 11 a week. That's the highest on the form. 1 to 11, how many drinks per week? But I've learned and I've been trained in AA that there's opportunities for me to pass on our message to people who maybe are not familiar. So I circled 0 like I was supposed to, but I wrote over in the column, sober since January the 5th of 1990. And I just wrote it there. And I, got all my blood work and all the EKGs and stuff, and then 3 weeks later they call you in and they want to go through your blood work and everything, and she said, this note, sober since 1990. She's like, not even one? Now, by the way, this is not a layperson. This is truthfully it's a doctor who I had to pay a lot of money to be able to see her whenever I want, who's been to the best schools in America. And she was like, not even one. And I was like, no. I said, I'm an alcoholic. And then for the next 20 minutes, kind of shared about AA with her. But, my point is, when we talk about, especially after steps 1, 2, 3, when we get to 4, when we get down to causes and conditions, when I look at my partner, it's so clear to me today. I just didn't know this 30 years ago, 40 years ago. He wants to be a better person. He has that goal in life. He's a really good member of his church, super active in a lot of charities. He wants to. He goes to what are they? I think they call it small class or small group, right? Those of you that go to Bible study. But he's a really good person. He wants to become a better person. But he can have that beer at the end of the day. He can have 2 glasses of wine. For us, we have to not confuse ourselves that working the steps is about becoming a perfect person. Because that's just not going to happen for people like us. We have to work the steps because we can't afford to have that first drink. It's not an option for people like us. The guilt, shame, remorse, whatever else is going on in your life, I'm not like my partner. I don't get a free pass. One drink. Tom I used to say it all the time. He would say the alcoholic ego is so insane that, and I used to love that he would admit it for himself, that a prisoner could become the warden of a prison, but yet he couldn't have one drink. Doesn't that seem kind of impossible? If you're that spectacular a human being that you can be a former prisoner and become a warden, you would think you have your you-know-what together enough to just have one drink. Wouldn't you? Wow, it's never happened before in the United States of America? No convicted felon has ever been the warden of a maximum custody penitentiary? And the human being that pulls that off can't have one drink. Not one single drink. And, I didn't know that for a long time. The chapters that I just referenced explain so much, especially of my teenage years. Everything makes sense now. Back then, I didn't think it made sense too much. I can't tell you what my first drink was because, my family is insane. My family doesn't even count all drinking as drinking, right? Like if this was a beer and I'm just having a leisurely beer, that's not really drinking in my family. Like drinking with an ing is you're on a mission. Like you don't know what's going to happen, but you have a good idea how bad it's going to turn out, right? But I always say, it's the physical allergy and the mental obsession that make me an alcoholic. I didn't know that for a long time. Sure, I then have the spiritual malady, but lots of people have the spiritual malady. Lots of people. Seems everybody I work with has some type of spiritual malady. What 90% of them don't have is a physical allergy to alcohol and a mental obsession. But I know there are other things that I have that don't make me an alcoholic, but sure are common in the alcoholic kind of family DNA, if we want to call it that. Like I've heard enough stories that I know. For me, there are a couple of them that are important. Since I've been a young boy, if you tell me not to do something, I'm going to do it. So just know that right away. Since I've been a young boy, almost even worse, if you tell me to do something without giving me a legitimate reason as to why I need to do it, I'm not going to do it. If you tell me not to go somewhere, I am going to go there. And probably the worst one of them all, like I'm with my mother and my sister, and we're going into the supermarket, and the really bad kids are hanging out behind the supermarket. If you tell me not to hang out with a particular person because they're the bad kids, I'm going to look for them, right? I'm going to hang out with them. And, right before I went into junior high, one of those kids who my mother said, don't ever talk to, don't hang out with them, those are the bad kids in the woods. One of those kids said, Billy, you should come to the woods on Friday night. I was waiting for my invitation to the woods. Like, I knew that whatever went on there must be really cool. I knew it. And especially that my mother told me not to do it. I knew it had to be good. And then I wind up in the woods. My life changes. My life changes because of 4 things, There's a bonfire. I've never been to a bonfire in the woods. There's loud, heavy metal music. There's alcohol, and there's girls. And by the next day, maybe other people had a lot of aspirations in life. If the best my life got was the woods and a fire and loud heavy metal music and girls and alcohol, that's all I need. Like, I'm not looking for anything more. I'm not a deep person. Not like some overly deep person. Like, that is enough for me. And by the time I was in junior high and high school, by the time I was in 9th grade, I don't like the word progression, but I can tell you mine. By the time I was in 9th grade, the only thing I thought about is where are we drinking on Friday night? Like, who has fake ID and whose parents are away and whose brother or sister can get us something. By the time I was in 10th grade, the only thing I thought about is I legitimately can't make it to Friday night. Like, I can't not drink till Friday night. Friday night might as well be next summer. Like, I got to drink by Wednesday, preferably Tuesday. And by the time I was in, a 10th grader, 11th grader, 12th grader, I hardly went to school on a Monday morning on time. And I say this, it's kind of embarrassing and whatever, but it's the truth. I was 40 years old and 17 years sober before I really understood that most of the world thinks drinking a 6-pack in one night is excessive. They think that's like over the top. They think that's like out of control. And I tell you that because I remember being 17 years old and I was in this high school and I had to go to the school counselor, the psychologist, once a week because I was always in trouble, and that was a condition that was put on me. And I remember one time being 17 years old and looking right at this guy. His name was Dr. Pavi. He was a decent, good man. And I remember saying, Dr. Pavi, this weekend, I'm only going to have a 6 on Friday night and a 6 on Saturday night. And I thought I deserved the Congressional Medal of Honor for that. I thought that I was really going above and beyond what should be expected of me. But I didn't know. I didn't know that for me, drinking that first drink is like lighting a stick of dynamite. It sets off something inside my system that I cannot not. I always say I have a lot of good drinking stories, but they all have one thing in common: the second drink. And it's so hard because our book is so amazing. It's funny because I was just in Poland and I was trying to explain who Superman is in English, being translated into Polish, but we all know who Superman is. We know he has a cape and he flies and he's strong, and there's only one thing that defeats him: kryptonite. That's it. Except for kryptonite, Superman is good to go. And it's really hard sometimes for us to admit, if we don't really understand the analogy, that our book has kryptonite. Our program has kryptonite. We don't have any program once you take the first drink. The book says not only does the book not work, but people won't work. Once we take that first drink, it sets off a series of events inside your body that you can't stop. I went to a lot of parties in high school on Friday and Saturday nights when I had 15 days sober, 20 days sober, 8 days sober. But I would always say to myself, you know what? I'll come back to AA on Sunday night. I'm going to that party. People don't come back to AA on Sunday night. It just doesn't happen. If you're on this side of God's window regarding physical sobriety, you got to stay here. Yes, do people come back? But the truth is, a guy told me this a long time ago. I wasn't sure he was telling the truth either. But you know what? It turns out he was telling the truth too, which sometimes drives me crazy. That I want to think they're wrong, but they're right. That there's basically 3 groups of people in AA. There's people who come here and they stop drinking from their first meeting. I don't understand that whatsoever, but they're here. They're all around you. And there are people like me, in and out forever. And finally something happens. And then there's the third group. The people who have been here but have never come back. And what this guy said is, the third group is 10 times bigger than the first 2 groups put together. That's how powerful alcohol is on the alcoholic. You're out. Coming back might not be an option. I wondered why I would promise my mother, my probation officer, everybody, I'm not going to get hammered. I'm not going to get drunk. But that book explains it. Once I take 1 drink, I get hammered. I can't stop it. It's like an out-of-control freight train. But that's what the allergy is. At that point, I'm 17, 18, 19, 20. I don't even know what unmanageability means. If I did, I would not even want to talk about it. That I'm going to admit my life is unmanageable besides this other thing, that I'm powerless over alcohol. Who wants to really deal with that? And that unmanageable life looks a lot like the spiritual malady in so many ways. But there's a lot of problems when you come to AA regarding the first 3 steps in the big book. A lot of problems. The shade's not behind me, but you don't need to get very far in the reading, right? Basically, you can barely get past the first 2 steps, and then the God word has to jump out, Like, all right, these are religious lunatics. I'm not a religious person. I really don't even believe in God. This isn't for me. And then I don't think most people are bothered by step 4, because what new alcoholic really even understands what inventory is? Very few. But 5, admitting to people, that sounds horrible. And 6 and 7 might be a little too deep for the average newcomer, but when you get to 8 and 9, like you're going to make a list, then you're going to apologize to people, that seems like way over the top. Way, way over the top. And you know what I want to tell you? It is over the top. You know why? Because if you're not a real alcoholic, you don't need to do it. That's why you need to find out if you are. Because if you are, the bad news is there might be other ways, but I haven't found them. Like, this is the way that works for us. And when we get, that second step, what I want to share with you is why it's so important to have somebody who works out of the big book. Again, to talk about Fred and Jim and Ebby and Bill and the experience in those early chapters is, I'm sure we've all been to like the late night 10 p.m. or midnight beginners meeting. I love those meetings, right? They're awesome. I love low bottom, out of control meetings, right? But sometimes you need to make sure you have a really good sponsor, because you could hear things there that might not be in the book. Now, one of those things would be insanity. Because if the topic is insanity, I want to tell you that, I like to jump off hotel balconies into the pool. Like, that's insane. Most people would tell you that's insane. I don't know. I like to bet someone after drinking to 4 in the morning, and one person here knows where this is. I like to bet someone that I can go down to the bluff right now and I can beat them in a swimming race out to the first buoy at 4:30 in the morning, right? When I'm drunk out of my mind, right? That's insane. I could go on and on. This is not a psychiatric clinic for myself, but just letting you know, if it was, the information would be bad, right? Like, I have lots of things like that, but the problem is, that's not what it's talking about with Bill's drinking, or Fred's drinking, or Jim's drinking. It has nothing to do with the insane things you do drinking. Because the truth is, and Bill W. spoke about this one time, everybody does dumb things while drunk. We don't own that. Drunk people do stupid things. Drunk people do insane things. Now, what I can tell you now, as someone who's worked in the corporate world for like 25 years, who approves expense reports, drunk people do really stupid things, okay? Exceptionally stupid things. Sometimes I have to be on a conference call with HR because of how stupid people are when they drink. The insanity they are talking about is taking the first drink. That's it. That's the insanity the big book is talking about. That for the alcoholic, the most insane thing you can do in your life is pick up that first drink. There is nothing more insane that you can do. And there's a lot of freedom in that when you finally find someone to work through the big book with. Wow, it's not about fighting every bouncer that I ever ran into. It's not about giving the cop the wrong name. It's not about like pulling over and turning off my lights hoping no one will see me. No, believe it or not, there's many people not in AA that when they get drunk, they do stuff just as stupid as that. Nope, we're talking that you started to feel uncomfortable in your own skin and your crazy brain told you you should have one drink to feel better. That'll make you feel comfortable in your own skin. And if you're like me, that insanity, my brain also tells me that I don't have the allergy, that you people are all overzealot church-like cult people, right? And that this first drink thing is all something you tell me to scare me. Like you just want me to like give up my lifestyle and become one of you church people. Like, no. The truth is I can't be that uncomfortable in my own skin to the point where a drink will seem like a good idea. It's a death sentence for me. You know, and I love the chapter How It Works. God knows I love the chapter We Agnostics, but I really love, talking about step 3 and that decision, because there's so many things that are taken out of context, and when you finally meet someone who can help you, they can clear those things up. We're not turning anything over to God, but I thought that's what it said. We're turning things over to the care of God. Not God. Care of God. And thank God someone was able to show me that the care of God for me is Alcoholics Anonymous. That's it. Period. End of sentence. That is the care of God for alcoholics like me. Stop debating about whether God exists or doesn't exist for a second, Billy. Draw a line through We Agnostics and write, change your mind. Like that's what it says in my big book. Change your mind. So you have that issue with the whole care thing, and God thing. And the whole, we get tired of the frog story, and did they make from, can you hear that even one more time? That they didn't jump from one lily pad to the other lily pad. They only made a decision. I mean, I'm just way too academically advanced for that. Like, I don't want to hear things like that. I'm just being honest about when I was getting sober. But that decision, making that decision, sometimes we hear things over and over again. And again, I've learned this in my professional life, that sometimes reading something or hearing something over and over again is really good. But sometimes hearing something over and over again is really bad. Especially if sometimes what happens is, sometimes what is being read is not what I hear. I don't know if anyone else has that problem, but I definitely have it. And so, why did I think, how many times did I heard How It Works read? When I add that up in my head, I got sober on the East Coast, they read that Northeast, they read that everywhere. It wasn't until I went to a meeting in California in 1995 that I went to my first meeting where they didn't read How It Works. I remember I called my sponsor from a payphone. I was like, you're not going to believe how crazy they are in California. They don't read How It Works. They read more about alcoholism, like the first 3 or 4 things at this meeting. But, for me, and I'm just being, entirely honest, like somehow or another, those 3 pertinent ideas that are so important, somehow or another, I thought that the pertinent idea with C said God could and would if he were found. I don't know when I made that up. I don't know when I thought that. But once my crazy brain thought that's what you said, that's all I heard over and over again. God could and would if he were found. And the truth is, we're about seeking, not about finding. So I don't care if you're an atheist or agnostic. I don't care what kind of faith you worship, whatever. That third pertinent idea of God could and would if he was sought is so important for the alcoholic. And I don't have a lot of time left, but if you're new, I want to tell you that there's also some words in the big book that are like tricks for alcoholics. And right at the end of this kind of thing, where we're coming to the end of where the steps are and the 3 pertinent ideas, and then we have the actor, and you can change all that. To me, you can read it as Billy, and then it sounds really horrible if you change some of the wording in that section of the big book, that Billy is the actor. Billy always has to be in control. Billy arranges all the things. Billy always, whatever. It's horrible news when you read it that way. But when you get past that, the 3rd step, the decision, and all of that, you get to a simple word. And it says next. That's where a lot of people are just like me, that have the other ability to put words in that are not there. Because some of us think it says next week. Some of us think it says next month. Some of us think it says next year. Maybe in my next life. That's not what it says. It just says next. And it tells you that all you just did is basically useless, if not followed at once by an inventory. That's bad news if you didn't want to do an inventory. I think the actual quote, I don't have my book in front of me, will have little permanent effect. Little permanent effect. But if you're new, I really hope you have a sponsor. I really hope if someone tells you AA is not about not drinking, that you run as fast away from them as possible. Because this is about not drinking. Is it about getting to that inventory and the amends and living in 10, 11, 12? Obviously. But it all starts with that physical allergy. It all starts with that. Without that, it doesn't work. And sometimes I think it's confusing to the newcomer. Could you imagine, just for a second, the first 100, Bill and Bob in Akron in New York, looking for newcomers to work with? Could you imagine if they were standing outside, I don't know, regular places and just asking people, excuse me, did you have a bad day today? Oh yeah, you might be an alcoholic. Excuse me, do you suffer from some ism? Oh yeah, you might be an alcoholic. The reason it's so important that we find out if people are alcoholic, and the reason I'm not against binge drinkers, I'm not against heavy drinkers, I'm not against people who have, alcohol use disorder. I'm not against any of them. I want them to get help. It's just I need the newcomer to know that if they're a real alcoholic, they're not the same as them. What will fix them is not what will fix us. I need them to know that, yes, we want great, beautiful lives in sobriety, but this is about people who, when they drink, tragic, horrible things happen. I mean, tragic, horrible things. I was once asked, and I'll end with this, they asked me something about a service position I had held, and they asked me, what did you learn during that service position? And, I had served as a trustee at GSO, and it was a really good question that I'd never really thought about a lot, ever, to be perfectly honest. What did I learn during that time? And I can tell you what I learned. The answer today is the same as it was in 2017 when that kid asked me that question. Today's date is September 15th, 2023. Today, thousands of people around the world will go to their first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Thousands. That saying, don't quit before the miracle, is another one. Just throw it out. Just don't listen to it. Don't quit after the miracle. And if you're a real alcoholic and have not had a drink for one day, a real miracle has taken place in your life that's not supposed to ever happen. Ever. But I know that those thousands of people, about a year from now, a lot of them will still be sober. 3rd or 4th week of September of 2024, a lot of them will go to their first anniversary meeting. you know somebody at their first anniversary meeting because, you know, the difference between like year 32 and year 33 doesn't look that great, you know? But when you know someone from day 0 to day 365, it's like a miraculous reincarnation. And you know that they'll be there with their family members. Parents, siblings, kids, whatever. You can tell who's the family members because they're the people who are probably can't control their tears, can't stop. Inside their heads, they can't believe what they're looking at. Like they've probably already tried to pay thousands of dollars to fix their loved one over God knows how many years, and they couldn't buy it to fix it. They couldn't love it to fix them. And now they're in a room that looks like a combination of like Burning Man and the Cheers bar, right? And they're like thinking to themselves, wow, $50,000 in the last 4 years to fix them, and this like wacko group of odd characters is somehow giving my family what we couldn't buy and we couldn't love. So I know that. I learned that during that time. But I also learned that yesterday, obviously in 2017, it wasn't September 14th, but today it's September 14th. Like I also learned that the fact of the matter is, as much as we're loving life today, this weekend, like there were a lot of people in the world yesterday who are alive that are not alive right now, simply because they suffer from the same disease of alcoholism that I suffer from. There's no difference. They're simply not alive because they suffer from alcoholism. And I also know that there are families, because of things that happened just a short 24 hours ago, in the middle of the night last night. There are tragic, horrible things that happened in the lives of alcoholics and their families that cannot be reversed. There's no time machine. Like that's it. I know there are people who suffer from the same disease as me, who were sober yesterday, who today and for a good many years will never have physical freedom for a long time. Like that's the real deal, alcoholism. It's a life and death matter. So I'm really glad to be asked to be out here. You know, I'll just share this from Poland that I was sharing it at dinner. Like sometimes we hear like how lucky we are in AA. It's 2023. We live in South Florida. There's meetings 24 hours a day, all around the clock, everywhere. There's a recovery house on every block, a treatment center on every block. Like, how lucky are we? It's all around us. And you know what? We might be too lucky. We might be too spoiled. Like I was just in Poland with people who don't have that. With people who were so grateful to just have one extra AA event in their life. Like this Alcoholics Anonymous thing is a miracle creator. Like we are in the business. The last miracle in Alcoholics Anonymous was not on June 10th of 1935, when two men sat in the Mother's Day 1935, when two men sat in the gatehouse. Sometimes we talk about AA like the miracles only happened in the past. No. The miracles are happening every day. I only believe in God, and I was a die-hard atheist. I couldn't, if there was a 10th degree atheist, if there is such a thing, that's what I was. And I believe in God today, not because of any spiritual literature I've read, not because I finally had the perfect leather-bound journal to put a fourth step in, not because of anything like that. I believe in God today because I have witnessed miracles in other people's lives that are not possible in the human world. Period. Thanks.